Hello, I am Michele Leclaire, Director at Buckham Gallery. Today, I am joined by Jordan Vinyard, whose exhibition, Summary of a Few Volts, we are presenting through March 20. In addition to visiting the physical gallery, her work may be viewed online on our website at buckhamgallery.org. First, I would like to say thank you to the individuals and organizations who support Buckham Gallery, including Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, the Michigan Council for Arts, Cultural Affairs, and the National Endowment for the Arts, the Greater Flint Arts Council Share Art Genesee Grant Program, made possible by the Genesee County Arts Education and Cultural Enrichment Funds, your tax dollars at work. An introduction. So, by challenging society's prolific button-pushing tendencies, Jordan Vinyard's kinetic sculptures, installations, and performances satirize the human body's exchange with the alchemizing effects of technology. Since receiving her MFA from Florida State University, she has exhibited nationally and internationally, including the International Symposium of Electronic Arts in Dubai, the Sejong Institute for Contemporary Art Museum, South Korea, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Tucson, Arizona, Art Basel, Miami, the Mint Museum in Charlotte, North Carolina, and many more. She has been the recipient of numerous awards, including the Oklahoma Artist Fellowship Award, the United Arts of Florida Grant, the Oklahoma Visual Arts Coalition Creative Projects Grant, and been nominated twice for the Joan Mitchell Award. Currently, she is an associate professor of art at the University of Science and Arts of Oklahoma and responsible for the university's expanded media program, including Kinetic's Biowork, installation, and performance. Additionally, she is the founder and director of Art Wrecker, an experimental space predicated on socially engaged and dialogical forms of art. Holistically, she is addicted to the mad science of art making. Welcome, Jordan.
Thank you.
So, like to start with your title for this body of work, Summary of a Few Volts. Could you explain a summary of a few volts and the artistic philosophy that informs it?
Sure. So Summary of a Few Volts is really about power, both technological power and socio-political power, and how those two things are sort of inherently conjoined. In addition to that, philosophically, my work and specifically this show really are a call to rehumanize through disruption and magnify the importance of regulating that power. So kind of a way that I've talked about this previously in terms of disruption in technology is if you walk into a room and you see a light switch, there's an expectation of power of a system. You flip the switch, the light comes on, you don't think twice about it. However, I think there's a way to generate dilemma in those systems. If you flip the switch on and it doesn't work, then there's a moment of pause. You have to question or even doubt the technology. Where my work starts to really interject is taking that a step farther, where if you flip the switch, the light doesn't come on, but one down the hallway does, then suddenly you become an active participant within that system. So you are physically and presently engaged because of the disruption of technology. You may go down the hall to see sort of what's going on. You may look for the sort of, mystery switch that would control that light switch. And so it's really important to me that those systems are kept in check and that we are present about how technology is utilized, that it can actually facilitate humanity if we are conscious of that. So a really important aspect of this was actually influence. I was researching philosophy and technology in this, and one of the really important quotes that I came across, I was looking at the Nuremberg trials, which obviously there's this sort of, fascistic machine, and that starts to integrate with technology. A lot of my work is heavily influenced by German principles. I happen to be German myself, so I've spent a good stint on that. And one of the quotes I found during the Nuremberg trials was from Albert Speer, who was the Minister of War. And his quote on this. So Albert Speer, who's the Minister of War and Production, famously said, most of the crimes of the Nazi regime were committed because technology cut out the middleman. People who would have questioned authority were replaced by databases. So this is something I've thought about a lot, about ensuring that we are the middleman, that we are cognizant of what our technology is doing. And a lot of this disruption is incorporated into the work, which is both literal. Sometimes I have sort of like, I'm in love with the quintessential glitch. But some of it is also, you know, in the videos and stuff like that, there's a lot of disruption. There's a lot of cacophony, I guess, if you will. But I think about this idea of ensuring that disruption to make sure that we're constantly the middleman. I think that technology has the ability to kind of breed a false consciousness, and that makes us aware of sort of what's going on. I think alongside some of the more mechanistic principles in this, I'm extremely suspicious of media consumption. And there was a really like defining moment in my artistic practices that influenced this. I thought that I knew what my first memory was. It was this sort of, you know, beautiful day. It was my 4th birthday party. I was with my twin brother. I remember the cake, everything was crystal clear. And then a few years ago, I saw that scene, which I had assumed was biological memory, on a VHS. And that realization that technology has been imprinting on us for that long. I mean, a VHS is nothing in contrast to the kind of technology we have now, but it's actually embedded itself into our memory to the extent that for me, it actually took away that biological first memory. I don't even know what I remember first as a result of that. So there have been a couple of, I mean, my work is always suspicious of technology. It employs it to criticize it. But I think with Summary, that really, that began to really unfold for me in a pretty profound way, where I was really dissecting the multiple facets that starts to take place.
That's kind of interesting. With that memory, did you, when you went back and you revisited it in this medium, did you find that that was exactly how your memory was, or did you find it was quite different?
No, I mean, so it's that kind of inability to discern whether I remembered the VHS. I had probably seen that video before and assumed that was that first memory. And actually the part of it that made me so suspicious was that everything was exactly how I thought I remembered it. It was, I mean, there's this kind of scene on the video, which is comical. My brother's sitting under this little bridge at the park, and he's got a plate of cake that blows up on him. And I remembered that exactly, or thought I remembered that exactly. And so that was just a mind-blowing experience. Like, I have no first memory because of how technology has imprinted on us since at least the 80s, which is telling of my age, but since the 80s.
Yeah, well, that's kind of interesting. And like first memories often inform our work. And so
yeah.
For me, I don't know what my first memory is, because I come from a family of like storytellers. My mom was always telling us stories, you know, about our childhood and about this relative and that relative. And sometimes the stories got blended together. So it's sort of these informed memories, the layers of this coming in, but not. And then I have like hoarded all these photographs that I go through, and I find that actually the memories are often different than what the film shows.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting how different displays of media start to impose themselves on our memory like that. It's like a photograph will sort of intersect with a video around the same moment, and then that sort of blend of those worlds starts to become apparent, so that you don't know what's real in a strange sort of way. It's like, oh, it's a clip of a memory, but is it actually a memory?
And now with all of the video editing and the constant taking and filters that you put on them and speeding up and slowing down, it's become this whole other artifice when people have these memories. Actually, would you explain Volt's prophesied to us?
Yes, so that's a huge component of a summary of a few volts. So volts prophesy really means that there's no stopping technology. I think that art has sort of imposed itself against technology in a couple of instances. I mean, with the Industrial Revolution, there was the empathetic decrees of romanticism. With futurism came the absurdity of the Dadaists. And I think that there's a necessity in being sort of the guard that says, wait a minute here. But also you have to acknowledge that you can't stop it. So I think that really conveying the importance of what volts, of what power tells us, becomes a really important part of our species. So an example of this is simply with the battery. So Alessandro Volta created the battery in 1800. That wasn't fully utilized until 1881. So 80 years later, it was used to light the rail systems. And that seems like a fairly benign thing, like, yay, you know, we have light, it's great. But then you have to think about how the rail systems were employed. So in Nazi Germany, the rail system became an important component of essentially deporting European Jews to killing centers. So when you really stop and think about that minuscule moment of power and how important it became in a more holistic view, then I think it kind of calls our attention to, well, what kind of technology is being created now and how will that play a role? And certainly there's not the kind of latency that technology experienced before. I mean, things grow at a much more efficient rate. Technological systems grow at a much more efficient rate. And so that's something that I really want people to be aware of. And I do think that artists have a role, even though technology constantly moves forward. I do think artists have a role as being the kind of gatekeepers of propaganda. You know, we have to realize that databases can categorize people. Power tells us where a species is going. Google does change the way that we think. It's that sort of imprinting mechanism. So when I say volts prophesy, I think it really is that. You have to think about, well, you know, we have these suspicions of power, but they do actually take our species to new frontiers in a very direct way. So we have that responsibility to pay attention to what's happening.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, artists really are sort of well, it's kind of interesting. Sometimes the canary, you know, in the mine, but also using these technologies in so many different ways. So yeah.
Yeah.
So when people come into the gallery, one of the first immediate favorites that draw them over is actually a kissing booth. I'm going to bring that up real quick.
Yeah.
So that you talk about, because it's actually, I've seen two reactions. There is the joy. People come in and they see the moving parts, and I actually have a little video of one of the kisses to share. And then on the other side, there is maybe the anxiety side of this is a simulated sex or affection without another human, you know. So yes. Could you talk about this piece and what brought you to make it?
Yeah, actually I would love to. So I am a college professor. I hear more than I want to about young love. I guess that's where it kind of started. And I had this realization, I think especially talking to a lot of young women who really suffer over the sort of, you know, Instagram renditions of bodies and things like that. And even, you know, and Tinder and things like that, which like, it's fine. You know, I have obviously no beef with how people meet. I think what becomes a concern for me is how the body is conveyed. Like I realized that the body is literally dissected on a screen. So it becomes a sort of pouty lips, the telltale pouty lips, and parts, body parts. And so that segmentation of affections became really important to me, especially when you think about something so simple as kissing. you know, perhaps one of the simplest forms of affection, and it's about that present moment among two people, but it's been so rapidly stripped away. So when I created this piece, I wanted these kind of dissected parts that could convey a lot of things, anywhere from, you know, pouty lips to a more sexualized version. And then I wanted to put in the center of these two pieces this sort of homage to presence. So the bench in between the panels of sort of suction cups, if you will, is made specifically for two people. The measurements are predicated on a very exacting ratio for what is ideal for two people. And so the test of this kind of became, will two people engage in this space while we have all of these sort of distractions around us? And I think it becomes very difficult to be present with another human being, but it's so lovely, especially when we are surrounded by so many parts and so many sort of denied moments of absolute presence. Another thing that really informed this piece, in just terms of thinking about presence, I've flown a lot as an artist, back and forth to different shows and whatnot. And I was sitting in an airport, actually the Orlando airport, and I looked up and realized I was the only person with my face up. Everybody else in the entire space, as far as I could see, and that's an enormous airport, had their face down, and they were engaged with a screen. They were engaged with that sort of that glass place. And it was kind of a desperate and lonely feeling. And I think some of the alienation that I especially hear from some of the young artists that I work with is directly correlated to that. So it really is, it's a call to presence, and simultaneously it should be a little disturbing in terms of sort of what we are surrounded by as a culture.
Yeah, no, you definitely capture that. And I see people engage with their phones more than with other people. I mean,
Sure.
even standing in lines waiting, well, less now, but with COVID, but
Yeah.
you know, people standing in lines in grocery stores, you're really close to a bunch of people, but everyone's on their phones, not talking about the weather or anything. I would like to share the video. Just capturing that right there, a little section. Yeah.
I was pretty excited when I first plugged this in, and it made some really disgusting popping sounds. I was like, there it is.
So we actually had a couple sit on the chair together.
Awesome.
And they were quite pleased and had shared some smooches in the middle of the kissing booth.
Oh, that makes me so happy. Like that for me is a win as an artist.
Yeah, they were like, oh, we love the kissing booth.
Well, if they are watching this, thank you. That makes my day.
Well, yes. Okay, so it was kind of this is gonna bring up American Dream, because you were talking about the sort of projected physical images found on like Instagram, or even like in beauty magazines or technology, everything. And when I came to this piece and really kind of sat there and experienced, I see this sort of like show pony with distortion in video, and then there's this fleshiness of the object there. And they seem, looks, and you even have their bandage clips, so it seems like sutures and all this flesh. Would you mind talking about this piece for me?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So this was part of a larger series. I was actually shooting so I'm from Oklahoma, so I was shooting a spaghetti Western that kind of played with some of those Westernized roots in Spain and Italy. And then this piece kind of became the sort of intermediary between some of the other works that have that kind of like biomimicry and then the Western. And I really thought about, so I considered some of the socio-political context of a spaghetti Western, what it means to be an Oklahoman and how that sort of like hilariously plays a factor in it. My father was like the biggest, well, to this day, is the biggest John Wayne fan ever. So, so that had to play a role at some point. But then I thought about this kind of, you know, attitude about being an American. I think especially being in a foreign country and shooting a stint of film, and the quintessential American dream. What does that become? And for me, I wanted to create these kind of almost sad pelts that have a history. If you look at them sort of sideways, they're actually intended to be structured much like American flags that are sort of hanging and disrupted.
Now I see it. Yes, I hadn't before.
Yeah. And but there's a kind of tragedy to that, and I think the center of that really for me became this show pony that almost has this superficial idea to it. It's like, has the American dream become a fat media pony? And that was something that I kind of posed to myself with actually kind of a tragic answer of a definitive yes. It's like there's a history of richness there that is reduced to a sad pelt, and the focus has become the fat media pony. And so that was why it was really important to use, it is a literal show pony, wearing an oversized saddle that I made from prosthetic silicone. It also has all of the bandages and stuff like that, the bandage clips. But really to sort of dress it up with this kind of this fleshy circumstance that it's a husk for what the American dream was.
I'm going to bring up that. So you said you actually, so you filmed this then as well?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know if this was stock photo. Oh, interesting.
Yep. The pony's name is Sassy. She was a bit bitey, but she facilitated the aesthetic perfectly.
Oh my goodness. That's great. Sorry, I hope you didn't get bitten too much.
No. Yeah, it was fine. It was fine. It was a very interesting day.
Yeah, I bet. Okay, well, as we have talked about, there's this sense of industry and technological innovation within the works, specifically these installation and sculptural pieces. They're often fueled with these kinetic components, sometimes involving the human form, other times purely consisting of robotic components. Can you take us through the planning process of these works?
Sure. Generally the planning process, so it's actually kind of hilarious. I start with a series of drawings, and usually the machines that I'm designing could absolutely defy physics. And I kind of like to stay in that station. Like I'm aware of the compounding nature of physicality. So there's this embedded failure in that I'm really addicted to. One of the very first machines that I ever made, or actually the first machine that I made, and this kind of taps into my history as an artist. I was a painter and drawer, and the very last show that I did was a series of figural works. And I was at the show. I had these two women come up, and they were very complimentary. They were talking about how realistic the hands were, the face was, and all of that. And that should have been a sort of happy moment for me. But I realized that I was losing the concept in the form. And at that moment, I posed to myself, how can I create the body without the body? And that was the originating moment of becoming a sculptor. So I built this machine. It was a disaster. I mean, it was the compounding nature of physicality. But something that I learned from that was it generated this kind of empathy in people. It was so pathetic. Like everyone felt sorry for it, including myself. And not just because I had messed it up as a, a young sculptor, but I mean, like motors would squeal. There were things happening to that piece that to this day, I can't entirely explain. But I think like that pathetic, that empathizing component is extremely important, especially when you're utilizing technology, you're utilizing mechanization. There's a precision to that that is inherent. You have to have that. But if it's balanced out with those kind of human forms, I think, again, that's where, for me, technology has to have that component that calls back to humanizing tendencies. And so I continue to design stuff with that influence that I know it's going to fail somewhere along the way. Usually from that stage, it's taken into prototyping. I'm a junkie for the prototypes too. I love it when they do weird stuff, and those usually inform other pieces if I've got something that's unexpected. Everything is mutable. I'm notorious for if a piece is too easy, I'm bored and I'm not going to do it. So it's got to have that kind of embedded difficulty where I get the benefit of failure to a certain degree and the benefit of something entirely new. And that's really helped me continue to progress as an artist. So, and yeah, and then I find a piece that I'm in love with. Usually a form will continue to pop up in my work, whether it's sketches or the prototypes. And it's something I cannot ignore. That's kind of where Kissing Booth started. Is like, oh, this form, this idea of simple kissing just keeps coming back. And it's really lovely to be unable to escape your own forms that are popping up in that way.
Yeah. So, I mean, it seems like you would have to have such a wide skill set. Were you already, very hands-on with like handiwork? Like, did you know how to build things before you decided to go into sculpture, or did you have to then learn how to weld, I mean, there's machinery you've put together. It looks like you've cast the cups. I mean,
Yeah.
How did you get to this point?
A lot of struggle.
Yeah.
I didn't have any exposure to that, but I think that if you have that seed of an idea, then I think it's vital as an artist to be unstoppable in that way. I didn't know what I was getting into, so I pestered a lot of people. I asked a lot of questions, and then I've been willing to fail a lot too, like just continue to struggle until you get it right. Interestingly enough, so my twin brother is a mechanical engineer, and we at face value seem to think so differently. But then there's this kind of common language that I became aware of actually when I was designing these things. It's like, oh, I do have a little bit of that mechanistic idea. And I could see these things functioning. I had a deep understanding of the body, mostly from anatomy and doing figural works. And I think machines are largely predicated on the body. Hinges are based on joints and things like that. So that was the kind of relatable circumstance to that. And then I don't know, being really in love with the process, where it was okay for things to not initially work and just continuing to press until I figured it out, on top of bugging a lot of people, including my brother, which has been kind of funny. And actually a lot of my work exists in sets. That's an almost inescapable thing for me. I'm half a set of twins. I don't know any different. So it actually really bugs me when a piece is sort of singular. It's like, oh, where's the other half? So that's been a big informant of that. Mm-hmm.
That's kind of interesting because with the Kissing Booth has the two sides.
Yes.
And then American Dream has the two.
Yes.
And even over here, yeah.
A lot of them have the duplicate, because that's just what I know.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Okay. So are you more concerned with the function or form in the works that you create?
So as much as I love to generate the function, form always. And the reason being is that there's an awareness that components give out. Like you will have stuff that just stops. It just stops. And so I think that it's really vital to make sure that I'm always aware of what I consider the husk of that piece, the sort of artifact of function. I think it has to have that inherent ability to communicate a story about the function, even if it stopped working, because that just does happen. That's just a part of being a kinetic sculptor. So yeah, I almost always lead with that. Obviously, there's a kind of fusion, like there has to be some consideration, just again, because of that precision that is required to get something to move. But usually I start with really thinking about the form, thinking about that humanized quality, the pathetic tendencies that have become incredibly vital in the work.
So the work I've seen evokes feelings of anxiety and existential dread, thinking of ideas associated with technological advancement and how that can lead to less control over our bodies and the world around us. Humans becoming inferior or less capable as a result of technological advancement. Your work often exists within a very antiseptic scene. Does this stem from your own anxieties about the future of humans in a rapidly advancing world?
Yeah, I probably watched too much Blade Runner as a child. To start off with that, but yeah, actually I think science fiction plays a huge role, which kind of taps into that existential dread. I think science fiction tends to get a bad rap, and art as this kind of gimmicky thing, but I actually think it plays an immensely vital role in our culture, because it's that placeholder. It gives us this moment to express some of those anxieties, but in a safe way. I certainly am a junkie for that. You know, it's like, I want to say I'm not concerned about the smooth oiled engine calling the body the fatty excess of existence, but I wonder about that. I mean, when you see so much efficiency, and that's a sort of prioritization, then I think, yeah, there is that question, there is that fear. It's like kind of going back to that imprinting on memory, like how much of that stuff are we not aware of, where technology is affecting us and we're not even cognizant of that. So I think that's where a lot of that starts to stem from for me.
The juxtaposition of absurd concepts and antiseptic depiction, one being this complex, chaotic thing, and the other a very much clean, direct, calming, is something I find very intriguing. Can you discuss how intentional you are about this juxtaposition?
Sure. I think a lot of this has been informed by medicine and medicinal sort of relevance to the body. You know, I think a lot about, you know, a ventilator is an artificial lung, a pacemaker is an artificial heartbeat. So a lot of those sort of interjections play a significant role. And I think that medicine and technology are a really interesting facet, because that's where there's a sort of supplement made, right? The technology is sort of helping a recovery of sorts. At the end of the day, I'm always kind of the fan of the messy biological creature that is interacting with that. I mean, I think it's really funny to think about how terribly puny we are on the evolutionary scale. It's like, we're not the strongest, we're not the fastest, we're kind of wimpy, we get sick very easily, as we've seen from this last year. But I also acknowledge that we kind of suck in a beautiful way. Like I'm so in love with that sort of pathetic tendency. It does make us beautiful. So I think that while there is a sort of preoccupation with this sterilized medical aesthetic, there's always, again, that element of the pathetic, but that's really what makes humanity beautiful.
How often do you collaborate with others in your practice?
Not terribly frequently, but when I have, it's been a really important or beautiful process, I think. I did collaborate with an artist out of Minneapolis, Hunter Jonikin, for several years. And we did several pieces together, namely in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Tucson. We did a residency out there. Probably one of our most successful or exciting pieces to work on was a piece called The Utility Harness for the Tortured Artist. So it was this kind of like playful mechanism where we just sort of leaned into that idea of artistic struggle. And we acknowledged that we were having too much fun as fellow collaborators. So we made a device. It was a harness that actually had pin nibs attached to it and a flex sensor. So when you smiled, it would essentially beat you. So you would be forced back into this sort of, tortured state that an artist would naturally be in. And it became this really funny thing. Of course, I was the guinea pig for this. So, Hunter's like, oh yeah, you go first while we calibrate it. And I mean, it beat the living hell out of me.
Oh, no.
We just kind of like, okay, let's take a step back. But doing collaboration with him was really fun. Recently, I've actually found myself in collaboration. So the next body of work will heavily sideline this and involve some fellow collaborators. One of those being Rachel Jones, who's a professor of biology that I team teach with occasionally. And then another is a former student / assistant. She's run around to several of the installations, including this one with me, Hannah Adrian. And a lot of the kind of technological concerns that I've had, again, I mentioned some of the students that I work with and some of the concerns that are brought into the classroom, namely with female students. And we kind of had this moment where we were talking about some of those things and entered into this kind of conversation where we were engaging with people that you would assume would be terribly independent women that suffer over some of what technology has done to the body. For me, I think it almost becomes a mutilation of the female body. And it was not a place I intended to go or would have seen going until I had a conversation with them. And it's like, we all felt this is a really important thing for us to talk about, and we almost have to talk about it. So we've currently been working on some pieces. Hannah actually said, this was literally yesterday when we were working on a piece, she said, yeah, we're just here breaking hearts and dressing up like men. And I was like, I'm going to take that with me for the rest of the year. It was such a hilarious and lovely quote. But I mean, I think with collaboration, it's got to be fun. It actually has to be fun. That's the drive. I mean, I think you can gain inspiration from each other no matter what the circumstances, but it's just enjoyable to be around additional minds. And I'm really having a blast with them right now.
That's kind of interesting, because you said one of your collaborators is a biology professor,
yes.
So not necessarily a visual artist at all. Well, it must bring definitely another side to the table.
It does. Yeah, it's really exciting. We team teach Biowork together. And that's been a really interesting excursion, and getting science students and art students to collaborate while we're collaborating as well. And yeah, I mean, I think it's great to kind of throw yourself into a territory that you're unfamiliar with. It's like, well, here we are. And it's become extremely influential. I really, really enjoy that process. It's actually, it's fantastic to work outside of just art with somebody.
And could you maybe describe for us what bioart is?
Yeah, so bioart is a utilization of living materials to create art, as well as we do some introduction to biomimicry and replication. So that is a facet that we incorporate as well. But really the prevalent, the overarching theme of it is utilizing living materials. What are those kinds of consequences? We get into lots of really exciting ethical questions about that, which is, I mean, that's fun to work with students concerning that kind of stuff. So yeah.
I imagine you must have had some great conversations.
Oh yeah. It's been a
Wow.
trip.
Oh my goodness. So can you maybe discuss your role as a professor and how this has shaped your artistic practice? Because in a way, teaching can be influential in both directions.
Oh, absolutely. And for me, it definitely is. My students know this about me. I really like to sort of like debunk hierarchies. It's like, no, we're in this together. I'm really open about, like if I don't know the answer to something, it's we learn it together, and that's a really exciting way for me to teach. It's been massively influential. I didn't actually want to be a teacher initially. When I was in graduate school, I was like, I'm an artist, and everything else you can just take it to the bank. And I had this fantastic professor who was like, hey, I want you to teach a 3D design course. And I was like, no, I'm an artist. and of course, she pulled the ultimate trump card for a graduate student and said, well, do you want your stipend or not? And I was like, see you on Monday. and she was really intelligent. She knew I was going to get in there, and I was going to be able to encourage students to do exciting, crazy things. Like, I love being an instigator. Pranks are my favorite thing outside of art. And that kind of enters the equation of teaching. It's a pretty rambunctious atmosphere. And it's been really surprising too. Like actually one of the biggest moments that completely changed the trajectory of my art. I had a former student come into my office one day, and she's just looking around at some of my sketches and talking to me about my work. And she was like, Jordan, she's like, you're funny, but your work is so dark. And I was like, whoa, like you're right about that. And it was a moment where I found myself being introduced to my own sense of humor. So the work gained this kind of playful quality. It gained a more colorful quality. And I've been a happier artist since that moment. There was a kind of like freedom of that, where, I mean, I really think that art is it's kind of a prosthetic for who you are, and in the way that a prosthetic in its base language is an extension. And I was a little off the mark of what that extension for me was until that moment. So that was a really a really huge moment for me as an artist, and that came from a student. And I think there's so much to gain from them. I mean, it's really, really enjoyable to work with those guys for sure.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because there is an inherent darkness, but there's so much playfulness in this body of work. I mean, with the kissing booth, I mean, is the big example there with being so playful. But even with like Couch Potatoes Eat Ones and Zeros, people of course are drawn to the audio and the visual video, and like walk up, and then they'll be standing there for a few moments, and all of a sudden they realize that they're moving. And so there's so much playfulness. It's kind of great to hear where that stemmed from, at least what you may be around having.
It was like kind of honorable moment. I was like, I mean, it was humbling, and like, oh, and so cool that I even have the relationship with them where they feel comfortable with telling me that kind of stuff. I really appreciate that kind of like true engagement. Yeah.
And do you have any advice you would like to impart on young artists?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think one of the most important things is being sincere. I think that it's easy to get caught up in kind of art speak and stuff like that, but if you are who you are and you sort of grow those extensions from that, I mean, we all have unique perspectives that we can't escape and shouldn't try to escape. And so I really try to encourage them to find that perspective in terms to engage with the art world and form their own vision. I think that also, I mean, they hear me sort of tirelessly say this. I think there's two types of art. There's not good and bad art. There's brave and boring art. And I constantly tell them, be brave about it. If a piece scares you, it's because it's that important. And it actually, it's really obnoxious. They regurgitate that to me. Like, I'll be nervous about it. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I should do this. And they're like, brave or boring, Jordan. I'm like, okay, well.
So it's a good relationship you have with them.
Yeah, it's pretty comical, actually. But yeah, I think those are kind of the main things. Just a lot of being really true with the work, and true and honest with yourself about the work and where it's going, are probably the prevalent conversations I have with them.
So I have one last big question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you place your work in the lineage of art history, like historical reference?
Sure.
Point for you.
Well, I think I'm kind of that mad mix of you know, I was born into the cutoff of millennial meets Generation Y and all of that stuff. And so I think that I've become kind of one of the intermediaries between postmodernism. Like, there's that kind of pastiche and irreverence and even play that postmodern art has in a larger artistic dialogue, but I'm also in between. I'm also on the cusp of digimodernism, or even like to think of myself as kind of one of the artists that can introduce those components. Because I think that digimodernism has been a little bit surprising in that it's brought back some unction. There's some virtue. There's some reintroduction to beauty. So I like to kind of float those two lines where there is the playfulness. You know, it's taking play seriously, I guess, is where that's kind of resulted. And that's been really exciting. But I think aesthetically, I'm kind of the love child of Cronenberg, Matthew Barney, with a mad dash of the poetics of Sherry Turkle, you know. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just kind of intermixed with all of those things, and that's an exciting place to be. It's like there's a call to reverence with the seduction of play, and I think that's kind of where I see myself sitting.
Oh, I think that's perfect.
Well, thank you.
Describe it. Yeah,
thank you.
Wonderful.
So I think it's really, really important to acknowledge some of the assistants that help me. It is, you know, my work is housed under my name. That's, you know, like, while I'm the conceptual force to that, I could not do it without some of my assistants. So some of the ones that came with me, my students, Zach Frost and Joseph Flores, they're kind of my mathematician and comedian, and they make things really fun. Hannah Adrian, who's a former student, she is the heart. That girl is the most sentimental, but also strongest creature I know. She's the muscles as well as the heart. Freddie Baeza, who I can only describe as kind of a jetpack to my existence. And last but not least, Keith Pearson, who's absolutely the scaffolding to my world. I could not do it without them. They've really assisted in the evolution of my work. And I think I really want to give assistants a huge nod, because I could not do it without them. So yes.
Yes, thank you. They are so important to have and to acknowledge. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Of course. There you go. And Jordan, thank you so much. It's really been great talking to you. I love having your work and watching people come into the gallery and experience it. It's just been wonderful. And thank you for sharing with Flint.
Well, thank you very much for having me there. It's been a delight, and I appreciate the conversation.
Wonderful.